All right, class, welcome. Think of this as your concise exam review for the Artemis II mission. We're going to dive right into the key technical objectives and the performance data from this really historic flight. From the second it lifts off to the moment it splashes down, we'll cover all the critical engineering milestones you need to know. So, let's get started.
Okay, so here's our game plan. Our review is broken down into 5 key stages, basically following the mission from start to finish. We'll kick off with the launch and the overall mission profile, then get into the really crucial translunar propulsion phase. After that, we'll look at an in-flight systems check, analyze the lunar flyby, and wrap up with re-entry and recovery. This is going to give us a full, comprehensive look at the engineering challenges and successes of Artemis II.
So first up, the mission profile and launch. You know, the main engineering goal here was to pull off a nearly 10-day crewed free return trajectory. Now, this wasn't just a quick jaunt into orbit. It was a fundamental test of the Orion spacecraft's endurance and, just as important, its life support systems out there in the really harsh environment of deep space.
Looking at the timeline from launch day, April 1st, 2026, the whole sequence was just textbook. We saw a nominal liftoff of the Space Launch System rocket from the historic Launch Complex 39B. Then, just 2 hours later, bam, Orion separates from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. And by the 8-hour mark, the crew was already starting its major propulsion burns. NASA confirmed these initial milestones went off absolutely flawlessly.
Now, let's get to our second section, translunar propulsion. The objective here is about as fundamental as it gets for any deep space mission. You've got to achieve escape velocity and commit that spacecraft to a lunar trajectory. This is really the moment the mission truly leaves Earth in the rearview mirror.
And that brings us to a key term you absolutely have to know, translunar injection, or TLI. This is the critical propulsive maneuver that basically guns the engine to accelerate the spacecraft onto a super precise path to the moon. You can think of it as the point of no easy return. Once that TLI burn is done, that's it, the spacecraft is committed to its journey.
So, how did they actually pull this off? Well, it wasn't a single massive light the candle moment. Instead, it was a really carefully planned 3-burn sequence. First, a perigee raise burn to lift the orbit's lowest point. Then, an apogee raise burn to stretch out its highest point, and then the final translunar injection burn. This multi-step approach is way more fuel efficient, and it lets them make these tiny, precise trajectory adjustments. This whole sequence was wrapped up on April 2nd, and it officially marked the first time humans had left Earth's orbit since all the way back in 1972 with Apollo 17.
And this brilliantly illustrates the result of all that propulsion. After that final TLI burn, the Orion spacecraft hit a peak velocity of approximately 40,000 kilometers per hour. I mean, just think about that. That's the incredible speed you need to literally break free from Earth's gravity and start that long coast out toward the moon.
With the spacecraft successfully on its way, let's shift our focus to how the in-flight systems actually performed. And you know what? We have a perfect case study for this review. A real-world example of anomaly detection and resolution that happened during that deep space transit phase of the mission.
So picture this. It's flight day 4. The crew is more than halfway to the moon, and a minor, but technically pretty significant anomaly gets detected. The issue is with a key component of the life support subsystem, a blockage in the urine vent line.
Now, this is a textbook example of a formal resolution procedure in action. First, the crew and ground control work together to isolate the issue. The main suspect? Frozen urine in the vent line. The immediate countermeasure was to activate onboard heaters to try and clear that blockage. And while that was happening, they implemented the contingency plan, which meant the crew started using collapsible urinals.
The successful fix was a huge confidence builder for the Orion systems. Mission specialist Christina Koch even joked about becoming the space plumber. But this incident really perfectly demonstrates the robustness of both the system's design with all its built-in redundancies and, just as importantly, the effectiveness of the crew's training for handling exactly these kinds of unexpected issues.
All right, let's move on to the scientific and navigational heart of the mission, the lunar flyby operations. The main objective here went way beyond just sightseeing. It was all about rigorously testing deep space navigation protocols and gathering a ton of critical performance data.
So these were the primary test objectives for the flyby on April 6th. The crew was tasked with taking some incredible high-resolution photos of the lunar surface, but critically, from a systems perspective, they were testing the exact timing of signal loss and reacquisition as they passed behind the far side of the moon. This let them validate deep space navigation protocols far from Earth's help, and, as a pretty cool historic bonus, they officially broke the Apollo 13 record for the farthest humans have ever traveled from our planet.
Now, what's really interesting here is how this slide quantifies the flyby's key parameters. The expected closest approach was in that range of 4,000 to 8,000 kilometers. This specific path resulted in a planned radio blackout that lasted somewhere between 30 and 50 minutes while Orion was on the far side. These are the hard numbers that really define the operational window for all that data collection.
And that brings us to our final section, re-entry and recovery. You can really think of this whole phase as the ultimate final exam for the Orion vehicle. It's designed to validate its performance during that incredibly high-energy return right through Earth's atmosphere.
So, the main focus of the return is data collection. Engineers are going to be intensely focused on validating the thermal performance of that massive heat shield as it just endures these extreme temperatures. They'll also be checking the accuracy of the navigation and guidance systems right down to the last second. And of course, the entire sequence is a test of the splashdown and recovery procedures, with a targeted splashdown around April 10th or 11th.
So that concludes our systems review of Artemis II. The mission successfully flight tested the core transportation and life support vehicle needed for a lunar journey. As a final thought for you to consider, Artemis II tested the vehicle systems. What is the single biggest new system, the next piece of critical hardware that's required for Artemis III to go from this successful flyby to an actual lunar landing? That is the next major engineering challenge on the horizon.